When we think about the concept of old money, that is, wealth passed down through a family, often for 3 or more generations, it becomes clear that numerous storied American dynasties have adeptly navigated the financial portion of this skilled legacy. Take, for instance, the Rockefellers, who not only achieved status among the wealthiest families in history, but also dipped their toes into politics, with a member helming the vice presidency, among other notable posts. Then, there are the true political old money dynasties, like the Bushes and Kennedys, which have not only gathered significant fortunes, but also fielded presidents. Yet, what if we were to tell you that there is one family, descended directly from the great voyage of the Mayflower, that has both secretly gathered immense wealth and boasted the highest number of presidents to emerge from one single lineage, with 3, surpassing the Roosevelts, eclipsing the Adams, and outstripping the Bushes. Indeed, members of this family have, from the windows of the White House, directed the nation through the tumultuous Civil War, the ecstasy of the Roaring Twenties, and the horrors of World War II. Furthermore, members of this dynasty hold achievements not even limited to the confines of Earth, with one descendant becoming the 2nd person to ever orbit in space and the 5th person to land on the moon, while another family member redefined the role of women in American literature. However, even with all of these accomplishments, this illustrious old money line did not always act under the bright light of the law. Instead, some chose to operate in the shadows on occasion, helping to create the Federal Reserve and even involving themselves in the Chinese opium trade. In today's episode, we plan to detail it all for you in short order, as we describe the old money dynasty that built modern America, the Delano family. To understand the true origins of this epic family, we must begin our story at the turn of the 17th century, in 1602 to be precise, when Philip Delano was born in Holland. The name Delano has origins in both Belgium, from the town Delano, as well as Germany, where the name directly translates to cleared land. Yet, despite his deep European lineage, from a tender age, Philip felt that he could make a mark elsewhere. And this feeling was only exacerbated in 1620, when his cousin, John Cook, boarded the Mayflower, the first ship to carry pilgrims from England to the US territory of Plymouth, situated in what is now known as Massachusetts. After arriving, this group of pilgrims created the first ever New England colony in 1620, cementing English presence on US soil. Now, it's important to emphasize just how important this move was. Before the Mayflower landed, the United States, as it is now known, was populated by groups of indigenous peoples, and the socio-political landscape represented a complex web of different languages and cultural traditions. The arrival of the English aboard the Mayflower directly changed this culture, primarily with the formation of the Mayflower Compact, which formed the basis of central governance in the US. And, following in his cousin's footsteps, Philip Delano took the next ship from England, named the Fortune, where he traveled in his adolescence, over to Plymouth in 1621. Once settled in America, the Delano name was adopted to the more anglicized version, Delano, that we know today. Following this, Philip found his wife, Hester Dewsbury, in 1634. The pair went on to have a total of 7 children together, eventually settling in the Dartmouth territory. However, the following years sought to disrupt this happy picture, as war broke out in around 1647. Philip chose to fight for his territory alongside his son Jonathan, leaving his wife and children and accepting the long road of warfare. Just 6 years later, Hester unfortunately passed away of unknown causes. The eventual ending of this war in 1675 saw every home in Dartmouth burned to cinders, leaving the Delano family in a state of jeopardy, and Philip's death in 1681 only worsened their position. Nevertheless, Philip's son, Jonathan Delano, saw the ending of the war as a chance to re-establish his family name and found an opportunity to marry a woman named Mercy Warren. Mercy was the granddaughter of one of the most prolific men at the time, Richard Warren, who was one of the founding members to sign the Mayflower Compact. Her status, coupled with Philip's respect, generated from his efforts in the recent war, put the Delano family in a firm position in the twilight of the 17th century during Dartmouth's redevelopment period. The couple would go on to have a staggering 13 children, most of whom would help to build the Delano name through respected trades like shipbuilding. And as the Delano lineage grew, so did their political influence. And by the mid-18th century, descendants such as Paul Delano, the great-grandson of Jonathan, had firmly situated themselves as part of the Boston Brahmins, a group of upper-class elites who helped to shape the country's economy, educational system, and political landscape. As the 18th century blazed on, political opinions on the moral, economic, and ethical basis for the then common practice of slavery became a dividing line between northern and southern states. This disagreement reached an almighty crescendo in 1861, after 7 southern states organized a break from the rest of the country, creating what they called the Confederate States of America. Of course, the following events of the Civil War are well documented, and eventually President Abraham Lincoln led the anti-slavery Republicans to victory in the war in 1865. However, throughout this period, the career of another future president, one Ulysses S. Grant, began to take shape. Now, with the surname Grant, you may be wondering why we are even mentioning Ulysses in a video about the Delanos. However, behind the surface, Ulysses had Delano blood running through his veins, blood that 2 future presidents would likewise share. This connection between the Delano and Grant families occurred in the mid-18th century, when Jonathan Delano's granddaughter, Susanna Delano, married Noah Grant, a military captain during the French and Indian Wars. Upon their marriage, Susanna's maiden name was replaced with Grant, and 2 generations later, in 1882, Ulysses S. Grant was born in Ohio. Now, Ulysses' early life wasn't exactly the roller coaster journey that you might expect from a future president. Rather, it was a very mundane and normal way of living. Son to a tanner, a job that involves rearing cattle and creating products from their leather, Ulysses was shown the virtue of hard work from a young age. His academic mind, on the other hand, received little stimulation. However, Ulysses did not want to continue his father's business, and instead wanted to earn a decent education. The only way to do this in the 19th century, however, was to enroll in the military. And so in 1839, with the help of his father, Ulysses embarked on his military career. His first notable military campaign started in 1846, at the outbreak of the American-Mexican conflict. Notably, Ulysses showed tactical savvy and bravery, serving under 2 generals and gaining respect amongst everyone he fought with. Then, Ulysses resigned from the military in 1854, seemingly feeling no affection for the career path. Instead, he tried to run his own farm and create a tanning business like his father before him. Both ventures, however, failed miserably. And so, when the Civil War broke out in 1861, Grant had no choice but to resort back to military ways. Instantly, Grant's experience and knowledge of warfare proved vital to the success of the Union. In 1862, for instance, he led the Union to a major victory at Fort Donelson in Tennessee, where Grant's tactics forced over 15,000 rebellion troops to surrender. Further victories followed in April of 1862, where Grant stifled a Confederate ambush, minimizing Union losses and stopping the South from gaining any kind of momentum. His tactical brilliance eventually led Grant to take over command of the entire Union force in 1864, which he, of course, led to victory over the outnumbered Confederate forces. Following his military successes, Grant sought to transition his career into politics, first receiving the title of General of the Armies of the United States in 1866. Further honors followed in 1867, when Grant was appointed as Interim Secretary of War, a position which denied the established rules of tenure in office and showed just how influential Grant had become. A shrewd political tactic of resigning from this position in 1868 strengthened Grant's ties with the Republicans, eventually leading to his presidency a year later. Now, Grant's 2-term presidency is not one greatly remembered in American politics, largely because he did not do anything monumentally significant on paper. Rather, he helped to stabilize the position of Congress and protect the vulnerabilities of African Americans in a post-slavery society. Nevertheless, Delano blood, no matter how diluted, had found its way to the top of the White House for the first time. Central to this period was another member of the Delano family, perhaps not so well known but significant nonetheless. His name was Warren Delano Jr., son of prolific military captain Warren Delano Sr. and a direct descendant of Philip Delano. Born in 1809, Warren grew up at around the same period as Ulysses, give or take a decade or so. However, unlike Ulysses, who vastly improved the Delano legacy, Warren's actions only appeared to ruin it. Notably, Warren affiliated himself with the underground Chinese opium trade, an operation which throughout the 1800s ruined the lives of millions through unquenchable addiction and even soured foreign relations, leading to the First Opium War in 1840. Through this illegal business and subsequent prolific profits, Warren Jr. was able to found Lehigh University in the 1850s and even went on to buy a substantial territory of land in Pennsylvania, which he named fittingly Delano. Therefore, the Civil War period was one which dramatically shaped the legacy of the Delanos, both positively and negatively. However, in future years to come, the family would only go on to reach new heights. As we reach the beginning of the 1870s, for instance, we see another pivotal figure, Columbus Delano, rise to a position of immense influence. Born in 1809, Columbus wasn't born with the privilege that many of his ancestors were. Rather, he was born into relative hardship, being forced to live on his own at a tender age. Faced with these inhibiting circumstances, Columbus drew on the inherent power of his family name, studying the practice of law. This education eventually led to his election to the United States House of Representatives in 1964, where he served as a Whig. During this time, Columbus actively opposed the migration of slavery to other nations, and these views ultimately led to him joining the Republicans in 1855. For the next decade or so, Columbus would hop between a plethora of political and non-political positions until eventually he joined his distant relative Ulysses Grant at the start of his presidency, serving as Revenue Commissioner. During his time in office, Columbus redefined the role of Revenue Commissioner, forwarding innovative ideas such as the protection of Yellowstone by creating a state-backed administrative agency. However, his time in office was not without controversy. Columbus did, for example, support aggressive tactics to force native tribes to subscribe to the centralized way of life, suggesting that the state slaughter the tribe's buffalo and cut off their food supply. Furthermore, in 1872, Columbus point-blank refused President Grant's orders to implement the first-ever Civil Service Commission recommendations, and this clearly corrupt behavior ultimately led to a forced resignation in 1875. Columbus went on to serve as president of the National Wool Growers Association until his death in 1896. His actions, however, ultimately acted to tarnish the legacy of his family name. A final notable figure that carried the Delano name in the mid-19th century was Franklin Hughes Delano, brother of Warren Jr. Now, you may think that, like his brother, Franklin Hughes is worthy of mention because he helped to smuggle tons of illegal opium through Chinese borders. Or perhaps like his father, he was a great military captain. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Now, this isn't to say that Hughes had a poor career, as he did in fact earn great success through various business ventures, such as founding a shipping company. However, one of the most notable reasons for his significance lies in his marriage to Laura Astor. Now, the Astors were arguably one of the most influential families in America during the 19th century, and this was primarily down to the family's founding father, John Jacob Astor. Born in Germany, John Jacob moved to the land of the free as a low-status immigrant. However, over decades, he built a business in the beaver fur trade, rising to such status as to become America's first-ever multimillionaire in the late 1700s. As his wealth grew, Astor started to purchase prime, sought-after real estate in New York, in areas surrounding Times Square, for instance. And come his death in 1848, his net worth was around $30 million, equal to around 1 billion US today. Upon his death, Jacob transferred his fortune to his son, William Backhouse Astor, who went on to more than double his father's net worth. Their empire grew to such an extent that even in the 21st century, much of Manhattan's prime real estate market is dominated by the name Astor, such as the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and Astor Place in Manhattan. Now in 1824, William would have a daughter, heiress Laura Astor, who would eventually go on to marry Franklin Hughes in 1844. The two retired in 1851 and expanded their influence in the following decades, with Hughes helping to form the town of Delano in Pennsylvania alongside his brother, as well as the Selma, Rome and Dalton Railroad, which was at the time the largest railroad in the state of Alabama. Therefore, by marrying an Astor, Franklin Hughes expanded the Delano legacy to the financial peaks of New York real estate and the icy rails of Alabama's railway infrastructure. And as we reach the end of the 1800s, we are introduced to another Delano who would go on to reach the peak of political power in America, Calvin Coolidge. Like Ulysses, Coolidge was not a direct descendant of the Delano lineage. Rather, a mere trace of Delano blood runs through his veins. One can trace his lineage back to Elizabeth Delano, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Philip Delano, who married into the Pinney family. This family later married into the Coolidge family, and in 1872, Calvin Coolidge was born. Coolidge's political career started in 1898, when he served as a city councilman in Northampton. He eventually found himself elected as governor in 1918 and used his position to capture political attention by making maneuvers such as standing against police strikes. This stance led him to become the vice presidential running mate to Warren G. Harding, who went on to become US president in 1921. Just 2 years later, however, Harding would suffer an unexpected death, propelling Coolidge from vice president to president, and marking the second time a Delano had become the most important political figure in America. During his presidential career, Coolidge helped to restore the general public's faith in the government, which had been shattered by scandal after scandal in the preceding years. He was a seen and honest man of the people, and come the end of Coolidge's presidential career in 1929, the Delanos had a generally positive impact on the state of American politics. However, the rise of Frederick Adrian Delano would only come to change this. The son of Warren Delano Jr., Frederick Adrian Delano was born in Hong Kong in 1863 and quickly moved back to US soil to study at Harvard University, where he graduated in 1885. After graduating, Frederick pursued a career in railroading, which he enjoyed until 1914, when he was given the opportunity to work as vice chairman of the government's newly formed Federal Reserve Board. Nowadays, the Federal Reserve is undoubtedly one of the largest financial institutions the world has ever seen. However, upon its creation in 1914 by President Woodrow Wilson, its goal was one of much more humble ambitions. You see, in the early 20th century, America was not the economic powerhouse that it is today. Rather, it was an amalgamation of economic instability, and as a result, many vital sectors such as agriculture were barely surviving. This poor economic environment peaked in 1907, when J.P. Morgan, a major financial institute, was solely relied upon to keep central banks afloat. This near crisis, coupled with Europe's seemingly stable economy that leaned heavily on centralized banks, prompted the US state to reconsider its economic policy, leading to the creation of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. This act essentially gave the government control over the economy by introducing centralized federal banks, which could print money and dictate the flow of the economy. Now, Frederick Adrian Delano played a major role in this newly created entity, which faced its first challenge virtually as soon as it was created, with the rise of World War I in 1914. Initially, Frederick and the board used their newfound power wisely, funding the war systematically by creating war bonds and deploying loans to help finance military incentives. However, since the First World War, the Federal Reserve Bank has failed to fulfill its goals of economic stability over and over again. Just look at the Great Depression of 1929, an event that the Federal Reserve was created to stop. And it wasn't until the events of World War II that the economy was pulled out of its dire state without the help of this omnipotent bank. And what about the 70s of stagflation, where the public was wounded by mass unemployment and anything but economic prosperity? Ultimately, whether the creation of the Federal Reserve was a good thing for the US is up for debate. And admittedly, after resigning from the board in 1918, Frederick Adrian Delano did not directly contribute to its future failings. However, he was still a vital component in the creation of an entity which has and will continue to shape the US economy for centuries, therefore showing the immense influence of the Delano family. However, the Delanos' impact on the economic stability of the US is not confined to just one family member, as, in the 20th century, another pivotal figure arose, Preston Delano. Born in 1886, a descendant of the Boston Brahmins, Preston Delano knew financial luxury from an early age. Coming from such a distinguished family, he was also a figure of influence from birth, and after graduating from Stanford University in 1909, pursued a career in politics. Working his way through the political ladder, as was customary for the Delanos by this point, Preston eventually found himself in office in 1938, ironically serving under his fifth cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Preston took the role of Comptroller of Currency, a position which entails the supervision of national banks and federal branches. He served this role for an impressive 14 years, making him the longest comptroller in US history. However, his contributions while in office were far from impressive. In fact, Preston's work was arguably regressive for the economy. Notably, during the World War II years, Preston worked to stabilize the national banks. However, during this time, the government needed vastly more money than usual to fund war efforts, and Preston's insistence on mere stabilization ultimately put the government in a worse position by increasing their debts significantly. Therefore, once again, the 1900s marked a point in American politics dominated by the Delano family. And how can we forget the man at the wheel during this time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, arguably the most important member to shape this family's rich lineage. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt has lineage from two incredibly influential families. His mother's side carried the Delano lineage through Warren Delano Jr.'s daughter, Sarah Delano, who married James Roosevelt in 1880. The two adjoined their names, and in 1882 gave birth to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Franklin was destined for political greatness the moment he was born, being connected to a total of 11 different presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt, Andrew Johnson, and of course, Ulysses Grant and Calvin Coolidge. Therefore, when he ascended to presidential status in 1933, becoming the third Delano to do so, it came of little surprise. He was simply made for the role. And during his 12 years as president, the longest run in American history, Franklin filled the shoes of his predecessors immensely, arguably achieving more than all of his ancestors. Faced with combating economic depression at the start of his tenure, Roosevelt presented the American population with a New Deal, which promised to protect innocent workers and force economic prosperity. When faced with the social, political, and economic turmoil of World War II, Franklin balanced diplomacy and military effort, only putting American lives at risk when the Axis powers forced him to do so. And all the while, Roosevelt redefined what it meant for a president to be a man of the people. He spoke on radio, showed his vulnerabilities, and set a precedent for how future presidents should behave. Ultimately, there is a reason why Franklin Delano Roosevelt is widely regarded as one of the most influential figures in American political history, and his actions only sought to bolster both the Delano and Roosevelt family legacy. However, one woman would seek to disagree with this view, despite being a descendant of the same Delano family. This woman in question is one Laura Ingalls Wilder, another descendant of Jonathan Delano, and fifth cousin of the president whom she despised so deeply. Now, to most, Laura's name sparks images of the influential Little House on the Prairie books, released throughout the 30s and 40s, and subsequent television series. And for the majority of readers, these books are nothing more than an enjoyable pastime, an escape from complex reality, and a transition into a simpler, more optimistic life. The books also help to redefine the view of female authors in a patriarchal society. However, behind the surface of wagon wheels and milk stools lies a much deeper political message. The Little House books, when read through a political lens, actually depict a disdain for Franklin's New Deal program. Further, these books lay a foundation for the political ideology of modern conservatism, which advocates the protection of institutions for the good of society. Admittedly, one does not even need to read between the lines to digest Wilder's distaste for her cousin's political agenda. In her personal diary, which was read during broadcast to the public via an interview in 2012, Wilder wrote of her disgust for Franklin's New Deal program, and even how she wished that he would be assassinated. Therefore, the life work of Wilder impacted the Delano legacy, not only by reshaping the position of female writers, but also by forming a new political ideology which is a major player in modern American politics. Now, there remains one individual who, throughout his career, took the legacy of the Delanos 384,000 kilometers away from Earth. Another distant descendant of Jonathan Delano, Alan Shepard, was born in New Hampshire in 1923. Shepard had a fascination with aviation from a young age, and shortly after graduating from the US Naval Academy, the events of World War II allowed him to propel his military career throughout the 1940s. He possessed such skill in the air that in 1959, Shepard was asked to fill one of the 7 seats of NASA's Mercury 7 team. And on the 5th of May 1961, piloting the Freedom 7 rocket ship, Shepard became the first American and second person ever to reach the orbit of space. As the Delano lineage has proven, simply reaching space wasn't satisfactory for Shepard. And so, a decade later, as part of the Apollo 14 mission, Shepard became the 5th person to embed his footprints onto the moon, cementing the Delano legacy in the infinite depths of space. Ultimately, the Delano family has proven to be one of the most influential families that have shaped the landscape of America in every endeavor, from politics to literature. Its legacy is complicated but undeniably expansive, and the actions of the Delanos will forever hold a grasp on the land of the free. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. Which old money American family would you like us to feature next on this channel? We've already done videos on the Bushes, the Roosevelts, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, and now the Delanos. We'd like your opinion on this so that we can continue to provide new insights on this fascinating aspect of American society. We look forward to hearing from you, and thanks again for your viewership. Cheers, until next time.